Sup, legends?
Welcome back to another unmatched video. This is very impromptu and unscripted, so I apologize if it ends up being very incoherent and rambly. But basically, earlier tonight, I just played my first match with the new Arsenal format. And so I said, hey, I should make a video just discussing my first impressions like I would with a newly released hero or set that came out, because this might be a cool experiment to look back on, as always, and just give my ground zero thoughts and see how they change over time. It also might be like a fun exercise for people to reflect in the comments and just give me their thoughts as well, and maybe critique my initial thoughts as well. So it's a traditional baked goods, probably wrong prediction, first impressions video, but I thought it would be really cool to kind of unpack my thoughts on this new format. So to give you a little bit of backstory, Summer of Legends 2022, the next major official tournament, is right around the corner. It's probably going to start sometime after Gen Con. There's no specific date revealed right now, so your guess for when that's starting is as good as mine. The interesting thing about this tournament is that it's using a new format. I should say like match format. Instead of Conquest, like we've seen in the previous major tournaments, we're going to be using Arsenal now, which was a newly designed format by the TOs. And this is a pretty major change. It's a new format, so like a lot of things are different. Certain heroes might be more or less viable, and certainly the overall strategy for winning a match is a little different. You still got to win games of Unmatched, but it's how those games get set up that is different, and this new setup process I find super interesting. So I said, hey, I should make a video so we can talk about it. And yeah. So earlier today, or I should back that up too. So before this Summer of Legends 2022 tournament starts, it's July right now. It's probably going to start in August. A community member named Cosmic Zap said, hey, I should take the liberty of setting up an unofficial tournament so that people can practice with the new format and also the timers, because now there's going to be timers implemented in each match so that it's a little bit shorter overall. And so I signed up. I said, hey, this would be good practice, because if I win this preseason tournament, well, I guess there's a big target on my back, but that just means that I don't really have to worry about Arsenal. And if I lose right away, well, then maybe I should start practicing. And so I had my first match for that preseason unofficial tournament tonight, and I was like, hey, this is cool. The people need to know. And so I went to the gym, ate dinner, and now I'm back here recording in the middle of the night as per usual, because I'm baked goods. So how this format differs from Conquest is that in Conquest there's like a back and forth draft where the lineups are being clearly and publicly established and you can react to what your opponent picks. This is a little different. There's less information up front and the reactions happen a little bit slower. So let's give an example. Basically in Arsenal, how it works is I am going to pick 4 heroes secretly from my opponent. Let's say I pick these 4. My opponent is then going to pick 4 heroes secretly from me. Let's say he picks these 3, and maybe I'm playing Prospero, and he picks InGen. So now that we've both secretly picked 4 heroes, we're going to flip them over at the same time. Any mirrors that we have, so if we both pick the same hero, this hero gets banned. Neither of us can use it. So Prospero does not get to play as InGen, unfortunately. And then we repeat the process. So these 3 heroes, since they are unique for each side, will stay up and we'll just pick again. So let's say I pick Bloody Mary. And who would Prospero pick? Probably Sinbad, because Prospero likes Sinbad. So now we'll flip over these 2 new heroes. And now that we have a full unique lineup of 4 heroes, we're good to go. I should say while I'm explaining this, I'm just like giving this a very like Spark Notes, skimming through this explanation. Zero Skater made a format showcase video sometime last week, so you should go watch that if you want a more detailed description of how this format works. So now that it's one too many ingens. Now that we both have a fully unique lineup of heroes, we're going to decide what gets played in what game. The Arsenal format was made to be a best of 2 so that matches take slightly less time. So basically, there's going to be a game where I have advantage. I get to pick both map and position. And there'll be a game where my opponent has advantage. So let's say, and so now we're each going to secretly assign a hero to each game. So let's say I think T-Rex is pretty dominant right now, and with advantage on a map of my choosing, probably going first, I can crush anyone on my opponent's lineup with her. So I'm going to put her in the advantage category. And now I'm looking at my opponent's lineup, and I'm saying, Prospero's got some good fighters. Who do I think I can take with these? Well, let's say I have faith in my Bruce Lee. So I'll put Bruce Lee in my disadvantage game. Let's say Prospero. Put Sinbad here and Little Red there. And these are both face down. So now that we have heroes placed, we'll flip them both face over, and now these will be the matchups. We'll decide the map, and then we'll just play the games. In this game, this is the matchup, and I'll get to pick the map and position. And in this game, Prospero will get to pick the map and position. And then we play, and either I win 2-0, he wins 2-0, or it's a tie, 1-1, and we celebrate because just fun games. There is a way to tweak this format so that it's best of 3, and that's with a third neutral game. Essentially, one of us will have the map pick and one of us will have the position pick. And so if we're playing best of 3, we're also going to assign a third hero here secretly while we do the other 2 games. So the difference between this format and Conquest is that in Conquest, there was a big public draft that went back and forth, and in this, the draft is secret, basically. There's like rounds to it. We'll pick 4 heroes hiddenly, and then we'll flip them over, and if there's any mirrors, they're banned, but otherwise we get to keep the unique hero. So it's like, obviously you're picking without your opponent knowing what you're picking. So it makes it a little bit harder for them to predict what you're doing, even if you are a player that has a clear main. Let's say your name is Chad or Prospero or Baked Goods or Chocolate Rain or Zero Skater or Gary or Josh Tan. Like, certain players in the community have heroes that they like playing a lot, so you can kind of predict maybe a fighter or 2 that your opponent will pick, in addition to they'll probably pick some meta picks. But overall, like, your opponent could pull a huge sneaky one and just pick 4 unexpected heroes from you that you had no clue they were going to pick. So that can certainly create some interesting moments in the draft. In the same way that games are assigned, where in Conquest, the first game of a match would always be a hidden pick for the heroes, so that matchup like was undetermined. But now all 2 or 3 games in this Arsenal format are also hidden pick. And it's interesting because you can choose any hero on your lineup to go in either slot, and you don't know who your opponent is going to pick, which means it can kind of be a crapshoot when you're hunting for matchups, and I think that's good. One of the things that happens in Conquest is when you're drafting, there's counterpicking, which is, you picked Beowulf, well, I'll pick Sinbad because Sinbad's good into Beowulf. Or it's like, oh, you have Beowulf and Little Red, well, yeah, then I'm picking Sinbad. So I am incentivized to pick heroes that crush your heroes, because obviously that's how you win the match. The problem with that is that I guess it's not really a problem. It's just like from a fun perspective, it creates non-games when I intentionally pick heroes that crush your heroes to gain a competitive advantage and win the match. But like in doing so, one of us doesn't get to enjoy ourselves. A key example of this was my round 4 match in Winter of Champions 2022. Yeah, that was this year. Seems like a while ago, but everything in this online world seems like a while. In my round 4 match against my old pal Jack Yuin, he picked Dracula first, so I counterpicked 3 heroes that all did well into Dracula. And like inadvertently, my goal for that match was creating 2 games where my opponent just didn't have a chance. And so, does that work in a competitive setting? Yes. Does it need to be that harsh? I don't think so, and I think that's what the TOs had in mind when they were shifting to this format. Also, I guess in Conquest, the leader-follower balance might have been a little bit off with the introduction of Battle of Legends Volume 2. It worked perfectly when there was an established Big 3 in the meta, so that leader had a clear advantage in a third of the Big 3 guaranteed, and follower had advantage with an extra map and position pick. But Battle of Legends Volume 2 kind of blurred the line for that establishment. And so in this scenario, Arsenal, leader and follower basically just means who gets to play their advantage game first, maybe giving them a psychological advantage over their opponent if they get the early win, and the follower gets map pick in the neutral game, and the leader gets position pick, I believe. So there's obviously a lot less opportunities to counterpick when your opponent's heroes that they're picking aren't necessarily known, and the matchups are hidden as well. That does create a little bit more randomness per se when assigning matchups, because you could have a character that does really well into one of your opponent's characters, but that character does really well into another one of your characters. So it's like, which character do you choose, and like where do you try to line it up? I think it is a cool little mind game. If you think about it as we're both putting a card down face down and then flipping it over at the same time, that's kind of unmatched. So in a way, this format is perfect, but I could potentially see how it might frustrate someone, especially later on in the tournament. Like if a crucial game for making the top 8 or something was decided by a hidden pick, I could see that rubbing someone the wrong way. But the best part about this is that with 4 heroes, your roster is a little bit expanded and you have more options. And certainly in a best of 2 scenario where you only need to pick 2 of your heroes in a match, if there's like a risk reward pick for you that like you might be hunting a positive matchup with one of your heroes, but it has a negative matchup with another, you could just not pick that hero and you could go for a more consistent result. And I think that's fine. The jury's hung on that regard right now, but this is a first impressions video, so I'm making this with very limited context and knowledge. So we'll see if that kind of take that I have, where the hidden picks are fine because it's like literally a part of the actual game we're playing. So like, why not incorporate that into the competitive format? I think it's interesting and certainly maybe a little refreshing compared to Conquest and matchup hunting. The other thing that Arsenal provides is the ability to kind of take the focus of matches from the top tier fighters to maybe somewhere around the middle. Because any mirrors, if both players pick a hero, it gets banned. So if I want to play Big 3 in Electra, I don't even know if they're the Big 3 anymore, and my opponent doesn't want to play against them, my opponent can just pick the good heroes that they think I'm going to pick, and then neither of us get to play them. And now no one complains about having to play against Sherlock. So I could see that as a positive. Just like having to avoid some of the more frowned upon heroes to play against. Like Sherlock or Medusa that maybe are not overpowered, but just have like an effect on games, we'll say. And if you've been a part of the competitive unmatched community for any amount of time, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Some heroes are just a lot better than others, and instead of it being like a draft race where, ooh, I have the first pick, so now I get to like pick from the best heroes before you can, we're picking at the same time with Arsenal. And if you really don't want to play against someone, you can just pick them and get them banned out. Or you have them on your side if your opponent doesn't pick them, and now you have a good hero that slipped through the cracks of your opponent. So it's still possible for these good heroes to get played. It's just a little bit easier for both players to avoid them, which certainly will have an interesting effect, because now the mid tiers, or maybe at least like the slightly lower high tier heroes, will probably see more play. And since the last tournament, there have been 3 new sets that came out. Redemption Row, Hell's Kitchen, and Jurassic Park 2, which have 8 new fighters, and I think every single one of them could have an impact on the meta. So from Summer of Legends 2021, it was the same 19 heroes, I believe, as the Premier Tournament earlier that year. So there was a very defined meta. Winter of Champions had Battle of Legends Volume 2 released, which had 4 new heroes, which shook up the meta a lot, since Yanenga and Sun Wukong were very good immediately. Achilles was a really solid, like, maybe low high tier pick, and Bloody Mary is one of the best known counter picks to Yanenga. So all 4 of them had an immediate impact on the tournament. And that was very interesting to see, because it shook up the meta. And now we have a new format and 8 new heroes, and anything can happen. And what a time to be alive. Like, it feels like we're in the golden age of Unmatched right now. So I forgot the original point I was making there. Yes, the mid-tier heroes. There's 8 new heroes. Tier lists, who knows? Who knows what they are? The next tier list I make, which will probably be sometime like after this tournament, I guess, will still not even be accurate with the knowledge of that tournament. But if I made a tier list right now, I hit stop record on this video and I went and recorded a new tier list video, well, for one, I'm sure you all would rejoice, because that's like literally the most requested video topic I get. But 2, it would be inaccurate, because I don't know. So the point I was making is the mid-tier and the high tier even is very undefined right now. The meta is as blown open as it might ever get, because of all the rapid release of sets we had earlier this year. It's slowing down a little now. Houdini and the Genie probably might not be ready right when they thought it would be, and who knows if we're still getting the other 2 Marvel sets this year. But it's crazy right now. So the established dominant meta performers like Sherlock and Medusa will probably get banned. And after that, we're going to see a bunch of crazy matchups, and it's going to be hard to tell what's going to expect, which will make for very interesting matches when you don't necessarily know like what the optimal pick strategy is, which I think is really, really cool. So overall, this format is kind of not like solving the problems that Conquest had, but it's changing the way that we will play a competitive tournament, and it's gonna work very differently in that it will give us like more options, I think, with the fighters we have, and like the way you want to set up your advantage and disadvantage games, and like how you're going to craft your lineup. Are you going to try to counter pick even though lining up those matchups is hard? Are you going to try to just ban out who you think your opponent wants to play? Are you going to ban out the top tiers? Are you just going to go with your comfort picks? And like, how are you going to assign matchups accordingly? I think it's fascinating and really hard to solve right now. So, yeah, I am really, really excited for this format. Even though it kind of like sabotages my whole mantra from like how I performed well in the last couple competitive formats by just counterpicking. That was like my bread and butter draft strategy. But I'm glad it's changing that, because that strategy can be unfun for the person that I'm playing against. And I would honestly rather have closer matchups that like the better player wins with skill and maybe a little bit of luck. I think that's more entertaining overall. So I am super excited for this. Let's give you the recap now of how my match earlier tonight went. So I was playing against Chupa Thingy, and he's I learned during our match that he's relatively new to the community, but he was a super nice guy, very smart player, and I just happened to open a tab in my browser with the League page for his player statistics open just before the game, so I could have a rough idea of who he might pick. And he only had 5 games logged on League. So I was like, oh, great. Like his newness was a little bit of an advantage to him, because I didn't really know like what avenues of play he was going to go down. But in the 5 logged games, he has played as T-Rex and Electro. So I was like, all right, I'll do my classic baked goods thing. I'll pick both of the fighters that he probably might want to play as, and they're both really good. So I'm also fine having that. And we'll do the classic tried and true strategy. We'll pick Sherlock, and not Jekyll. We'll pick Medusa, because you gotta stick with what's good. And my opponent picked the exact 4 fighters that I picked. So right away, these were just banned. How do I want to do this? Let's just align these and tuck them away over here. So yeah, that was a really interesting like first round of picking, because it was like, oh, how often is that going to happen where your opponent and you just have the same exact picks? So following that up, I said, well, who's strong? Yanenga's pretty strong, as we've seen in Summer of Legends. Doesn't really have, or as we saw in Winter of Champions, has like 3 maybe counters, except a lot of the new Marvel heroes are pretty good into her. So maybe not a universal first pick, but I feel comfortable with her. I also picked Sun Wukong, and because he's very polarizing, and especially if I can line him up with someone. If your lineup isn't like tailored to, that's my name. If your lineup isn't tailored to deal with Sun Wukong, you're probably gonna have a bad time. And I also went with the Menace Bullseye, because I'm a little gremlin. And I decided to go with Bigfoot because when in Conquest, I think he was a lot worse, especially with Sun Wukong coming in, and Yanenga with the ability to beat him pretty consistently. But in a format like this, where your roster is a little bit bigger, I think he's a lot better because, again, he can just dominate most of the people with his big values, big blocks, good damage, and cancels. So I didn't know what my opponent was going to pick, and it turned out he picked Moon Knight, Daredevil, Luke Cage, and Sinbad. So I think it would be a good idea to try to analyze what he saw, or what at least he thought I was going to do. The Sinbad pick, probably a counter pick to Yanenga. Yanenga is probably one of my most played fighters, probably, so like I guess that makes sense. And 3 new Marvel characters, which shows that even though he's relatively new to the community in the game, he's probably played with the new Marvel sets and probably knows them well enough that he would pick them second out of everyone else. Not picking Sun or Bigfoot soon is... I gotta keep correcting myself so that I can say it right. Maybe a little risky, but again, I very well could have picked someone like Little Red or Raptors or Dracula. I also like playing them, so I think that lineup is mostly fine into that. The other thing he said specifically, well, I guess we'll talk about that when we're doing the lineup. So 4 unique fighters for him, 4 unique fighters for me. So now we have to assign the games. So my thought process, I was going through each of these heroes and seeing what their matchup spread was going to be like. Bigfoot beats Sinbad, probably beats Moon Knight, beats Luke Cage, and also probably beats Daredevil. He has the cancels to deal with Sinbad, the cancels to deal with Daredevil, the versatile good defenses to deal with Moon Knight and his different forms, scheme damage to deal with Luke Cage, and big attacks to hit over all 4 of them. So Bigfoot, I said, hey, he's got a pretty good matchup spread. I'm probably going to pick him for one of the games. And this was, for this preseason tournament, we needed a clear winner because it's a single elimination bracket. So we were going to play 3 games. We're going to have that neutral game. And I guess if I didn't say that before, we play each of the games with advantage first. And if there isn't a winner, if it's tied 1-1, then we play the neutral game. So it will be game 3, but might not happen. So I said, Bigfoot definitely getting picked somewhere because he has good matchups all around. He's guaranteed win. Bullseye. 50-50 into Daredevil. Loses hard to Luke Cage. Loses hard to Moon Knight. Probably suboptimal into Sinbad because of his movement and draw. I have played all of these matchups as Bullseye. I am a Bullseye main. And I said, hey, not good into these 2 for sure. Automatic L. I have to get lucky versus Daredevil, which you always have to get lucky versus Daredevil. I hate playing against Daredevil, if you didn't know, and I also hate playing as him, so that's what I say to match his card back. Be gone, Daredevil, but regardless, it's a 50-50 with Bullseye, and I don't really want to risk that. I'd probably have to put him on advantage if I wanted to get a good start, and my opponent will probably just put one of these 2 on on the game with my advantage to stop me from being able to get a good Bullseye start. So, and then the Sinbad one is not guaranteed either. So Bullseye is like the exact opposite of Bigfoot. Like I really don't want to play him into any of these. And my opponent said he knew I was probably going to pick Bullseye, so he kept that in mind when he was picking all his heroes, which he did a good job of. And this is an example of counter picking in this format. All 4 of his heroes do well into a hero that he knew that I was going to pick. And the upside for me is now, instead of getting stuck with a loss, or at least 1 game loss, and just like a non-game essentially, I just don't have to play Bullseye. And now the counter picking that my opponent did, it's not necessarily wasted, because there is an advantage in like shutting down one of my characters, is that it makes it slightly more predictable where my hidden picks are going to go if you know that I'm not going to play as one hero. But now like the good matchups you had just like don't matter because I'm not playing as that hero. So they have to be good into the other heroes that I'm going to pick as well. Sun Wukong slaps Sinbad, probably beats Moon Knight. The lack of cancels Sun has hurts against Daredevil, who can infinitely recycle with Devil, and through adversity deals with your clones really well. Probably want to avoid that matchup. And against Luke, Ox form is good, but other than that, you're probably not going to damage him. And Still Standing will always trigger because you don't have feints unless you play a Chainmail or a Bewilderment or a Tortoise form, and Luke doesn't boost. But a lot of cards that lose to Still Standing. So he can probably go infinite. Trash Talk is also a pretty good card in that matchup. So Soon has 2 good matchups, I'd say, and probably less than ideal ones. So definitely in the middle here. Yanenga. Bad into Sinbad. These 2, actually these 3, I think, are all closer than she appears. But all Hail Mary. What are we doing here? That was a Harry Styles reference, by the way. Still Standing again works really well when your opponent doesn't have Feint, and there's only like 5 cards Yanenga has that on defense that stop it. But you do have a decent amount of auto damage that hurts Luke. Daredevil, despite you not having Feints, this matchup is even. Like, it's not super great for him as Yanenga. And Moon Knight, I think Yanenga is slightly favored. So, horrible, horrible matchup, non-game for Yanenga. Just automatic L. L, 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 L. And then some close games. So, my, like, power ranking of my own heroes for this is Bigfoot, for sure. Then probably Wukong. Then Yanenga. I think Wukong had, what did I say, like 2 good matchups and like 2 just suboptimal, whereas Yanenga has horrible matchup and just some even ones. So my thought process was, I'm going to assign Bigfoot to the game where I have disadvantage, because he's probably just going to win anyways. I'll assign Wukong to my game where I have advantage, because even in the matchups where I probably am slightly unfavored, going first and having map pick can help. And then my last option will be Yanenga on the neutral map, because I wasn't going to put Bullseye in, and I had less faith in her than I did with Wukong. And so I would rather just play the 2 characters I have the most faith in, guaranteed. And if I have to if it comes down to game 3, if I lose with Wukong most likely, then Yanenga is a fighter that I'm more comfortable in. And well, this wasn't determined at the time, so I didn't know if I was going to have map pick or position pick, but I was probably fine with it split being Yanenga. What did my opponent do? My opponent, in his game with advantage, put Daredevil. In my game with advantage, put Luke Cage. And in the neutral game 3, he put Moon Knight. I think it was really interesting that he didn't put Sinbad in, despite me having Yanenga and probably not wanting to play Bullseye. Interesting choice, but he picked all 3 of the Marvel heroes. So I'm not gonna analyze it from his side. Just I was giving my thoughts on like how I thought that fighter, how to best divide my fighter lineup, which I think is like, that was a lot of fun. That was a really interesting thought exercise that I just had, explaining my thoughts, and I think that is like the cool kind of thinking that this format will create, that is a lot more interesting, I think, than some of the scenarios that Conquest creates. And just the mind games with my opponent with these decisions, also very interesting. So looking at these matchups, how do I feel? Bigfoot into Daredevil with Daredevil's advantage. Someone in chat when we started playing this game said that it was like an auto win for Bigfoot, and I could see how that would happen, because the logs and like savagery and stuff will hit over his defenses unless he can blind boost them by having a low hand size. But if he's playing at a low hand size, then I can punish him by landing a big hit undefended if he just like isn't able to block. And I have 5 cancels, so that's a lot of devils that aren't going to get going, which means I can probably win in fatigue. So I'm pretty happy with that matchup. We were expecting a Bigfoot win, regardless of who he played, but I'm pretty okay with that. Luke Cage, Sun Wukong. Still standing is a little bit of an issue, but if I can just get rid of Misty and land some Oxes on Luke, I think that's my route to victory. Definitely a potential upset here, which this is one of the matchups that I was not looking for as Wukong. And then in the neutral game, Moon Knight versus Yanenga, I'm not super confident in Yanenga's ability in this one, but the fact that she is just so tanky with her ability, Moon Knight's Khonshu turns with the damage and whatnot is just a little less scary. So as for the results of this match, we played we rolled a die for leader follower, and so he was leader, so his game was played first, and then my game was played second, and as follower I got map pick here. So this game was played on Hero Rot, and I ended up winning a very, very close game. You should go. I streamed this game, by the way. I should have said that first. Go follow me on Twitch, and if you really want to see how this played out in real time, you can go watch the video on demand or the VOD. It was a really fun stream, and I hope it's worth the rewatch. This game was played on Hero Rot, and what ended up happening was he got some boxers early, so he was able to deal me damage back from me using like savageries on attacks. So my health got to like 10 very early. He played like 4 through adversities throughout the game, and me fainting his devils. Bigfoot was at like 3 health at the end of the game, which was much closer than I thought. I won because I saved 3 cancels at the end of the game and was able to make Daredevil exhaust, which pretty easy to do because of his small deck size, and I just canceled his devils, and he eventually died in fatigue, and I smacked him with some logs, and it worked. Much closer than I thought it was going to be, but still a really fun game. The Wukong Luke Cage game, I picked the map. I picked Hanging Gardens. I think that's one of Soon's best maps, and going first with your opponent on the low ground is just always something you love seeing. I really recommend going and watching this game instead of just listening to me tell the story about it, what it's going to happen. But if you really are that impatient, basically, turn 1, summoned a clone, boosted in to attack Luke with the high ground. I had an Ox form in hand, but I chose to use infinite strikes instead to try to make him waste a defense, which I realize in hindsight is not the right play, because almost all of Luke's defenses would they would stop me from being able to attack again with that clone. Luke plays Trash Talk, so that just ends the turn immediately. Then I believe so. Somehow I believe that clone dies. Misty gets on the central high ground space and attacks me with a commanding impact. Of course, I didn't know it was commanding impact. I play Bewilderment. I move Sun Wukong to the space next to that double high ground space from the central spot to the starting space for player 2. I move it next to it. So it's Misty, empty space on low ground, Luke Cage on low ground, and me next to it. And then at the start of my turn, make a clone in between them on the high ground to Luke. I play Fiery Eyes at Sea, look at his hand, discard his only defense card, and then attack him with a high ground Ox that dealt 6 damage on turn 2 or 3 to Luke Cage. And that was a really fun opening game. I ended up killing Misty because he didn't draw any Misty blocks, and then I was able to just outlast him with my good defenses. There was a turn later in the game where I had 2 clones out. I was debating on whether or not to make the third. I ended up making the third. I was at like 4 health at that point. I maneuver first action, top deck Phoenix form. I'm like, oh, perfect. And then I heal for 3. And that kind of like sealed the deal. That was pretty lucky for me. So I ended up winning both games 2-0. So there was no need for the third game. And there were definitely routes where I lost at least one of these games. Like I said, this Bigfoot game was much closer than I thought it would be. And I only had 3 health remaining at the end. As Zero Skater 12 was so quick to point out in the UM League Discord later. That was like 1 or 2 blind boosted attacks, and then I would have perished. But I think Daredevil like kind of has to play at a high hand count against Bigfoot, but maybe you take a little bit more risks if you think you have to do that to win. And then this game was also definitely losable for me, but I think those 2 big plays with the Ox form and the Phoenix form kind of sealed the deal for me. There were also timers in both games. We were playing on Vorpal board, and it's a little clunky with an online timer because one person has to like screen share like their timer in a different display, and then they have to like control it. So my opponent was sorry, don't have my water bottle in here, so my voice just got a little hoarse. My opponent was controlling the timer, but I was like never really pressed for time. The way it works is it's like you have 5 minutes total. Each turn you have a minute, and then after a minute you start like digging into the reserve. So you basically have a minute for each turn with like 5 minutes of overflow total for the whole game. And I don't think I dug into like more than a minute of my reserve time. It felt fine playing with a timer. That was like my very first time ever playing with a timer. So I was a little scared, but it worked out. This game, I lulled myself into a false sense of security when the first game I was like, yeah, the timer doesn't matter. It's fine. Because with Wukong's clones, you now have 4 people on the board to worry about. And with Hanging Gardens, the positioning matters even more. So I think I had like 40 seconds left on the clock at the end of the game. Chupa and I also like were a lot less focused on the clock this game. So there were a lot of times where we were like, oh, forgot to stop the clock, which probably not good, but hopefully there's like a better solution for that by the time the tournament comes around. Who knows? So overall, this was a really fun match. I'm so glad I met Chupa because he seems just like such a fun opponent. And this was like a really interesting, I don't want to say like experiment, but like a first time Arsenal match, like without any prior really like practice matches or drafts or anything like that, or like prep or really thinking about it. It was interesting to see how that played out. So if you have any thoughts on the Arsenal format as a whole, whether you think it'll be better or worse than Conquest or just different, which is still good, how you think it'll impact the meta, like what fighters will be better or worse because of this format. Do you think there's 4 fighters that you have to pick first every single time? Who do you think like a sneaky good fighter is? Like I have so many questions about this format, and I would love to know if you have any answers. So if you have some revelation you'd like to share with the class, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think. And yeah, I am really excited for this tournament. Yeah, I always get excited for tournaments because they're like the best part of playing Unmatched. You just meet so many people. You just have a lot of fun. The community is just buzzing. There's just this energy in the air that is so amazing. It's incredible. It's one of the reasons why I love this game. And let's get a little closer. Hey. And so I'm just excited for this. And the new format is just increasing my excitement by tenfold because I enjoy this shakeup that's about to happen. Not that Conquest was getting stale. It's just that this is new and exciting. So we'll see how this plays out. So yeah, anyways, like I said, this was an impromptu, rambling, unscripted first impressions video. My first impressions of Arsenal and a summary of my first match. So yeah, that's kind of all I have. I have no idea how long I've been talking. Probably it's always I sit down and I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna be like a nice 20-minute video, and it ends up being like 50. That's the baked goods special for you. So anyways, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitch. And yay!